In the ancient city of around 2000 BCE, Abram receives a divine call from God. A bustling Mesopotamian city with towering ziggurats, is steeped in pagan worship. God commands Abram to leave his homeland, family, and father's house for a land he will show him. This radical command requires Abram to abandon his cultural and religious roots, marking the beginning of a covenant relationship with God. The call signifies a complete break from his past, urging him to trust in God's unseen promises. God makes a profound covenant with Abram, promising him land, descendants, and universal blessing. Despite Abram's old age and Sarai's barrenness, God assures him of becoming a great nation. This promise includes the land of Canaan and extends to all nations being blessed through his lineage, foreshadowing the coming of Christ. The covenant is unconditional, relying solely on God's faithfulness. Abram's response of faith sets a precedent for trusting God's promises beyond human understanding. After his father Terah's death in Haran, Abram obeys God's call to continue his journey to Canaan. He gathers his wife Sarai, nephew Lot, and all their possessions, forming a caravan. The departure from Haran signifies Abram's full commitment to God's command, leaving behind the safety of extended family. The journey through rocky terrain symbolizes the challenges of faith. This step marks Abram's transition from a settled life to a nomadic existence, driven by divine promise. Abram arrives in Shechem, in the heart of Canaan, where God reaffirms his promise to give this land to his descendants. The lush valleys contrast with the arid journey, symbolizing God's provision. Abram builds an altar to worship God, marking his first act of devotion in the Promised Land. The presence of Canaanite shrines nearby highlights the spiritual contrast. This moment solidifies Abram's faith as he takes possession of the land, not by conquest, but by divine promise. Abram journeys south to Bethel, where he builds another altar to worship God. This act of worship signifies his ongoing commitment to God, despite the challenges of nomadic life. The altar becomes a symbol of Abram's faith and a reminder of God's promises. Bethel, meaning house of God, foreshadows its future significance in Israel's history. Abram's worship here reflects his dependence on God's guidance and provision, reinforcing the covenant relationship. A severe famine forces Abram to leave Canaan and seek refuge in Egypt. This crisis tests Abram's faith in God's promise of land and provision. The journey to Egypt represents a temporary retreat from the Promised Land, driven by desperation. Abram's decision reflects human vulnerability, but also sets the stage for God's intervention. The famine challenges Abram to trust God beyond immediate circumstances, foreshadowing future trials of faith. Fearing for his life in Egypt, Abram deceives Pharaoh by presenting Sarai as his sister. This lie leads to Sarai being taken into Pharaoh's harem, endangering God's promise of descendants. Abram's fear-driven choice reveals his lack of trust in God's protection. The situation escalates, threatening the covenant's fulfillment. This episode underscores the consequences of compromising faith, even as it highlights God's sovereignty over human failures. God intervenes by sending plagues upon Pharaoh's household, revealing the truth about Sarai. Pharaoh confronts Abram, rebuking him for his deception. The plagues demonstrate God's protection of Sarai and his commitment to the covenant. Pharaoh's expulsion of Abram underscores the seriousness of his sin. This divine intervention restores Sarai to Abram and reaffirms God's authority over human schemes, teaching Abram the cost of distrust. Abram and his household are expelled from Egypt, returning to Canaan with increased wealth but diminished integrity. Pharaoh's gifts of livestock and servants ironically fulfill part of God's promise of blessing. However, the moral failure in Egypt leaves a mark on Abram's journey. The return to Canaan symbolizes a second chance, yet the experience humbles Abram. This episode illustrates how God's plans advance despite human frailty. Abram returns to Bethel, the site of his earlier altar, and renews his worship of God. This act signifies repentance and a recommitment to the covenant. The return to Bethel marks a spiritual reset, emphasizing God's faithfulness despite Abram's failures. Meanwhile, Lot's separation towards Sodom foreshadows future conflicts. The scene closes with Abram reaffirming his trust in God's promises, setting the stage for the next phase of his journey.